Coming into you live in beautiful downtown Van Nuys. Hi, Greg.
Hi, Tony. Is that your opening?
Sure. Why not?
Are you going to do that every time?
Why not? Didn't they do that to the Tonight Show back in the day?
Why? Yeah, but that was back in the day.
Back in the day. Well, let's bring it back. That's what I say.
Oh, you are. You're definitely bringing it back.
Yeah.
So, what do you think of the glasses? Wow. Silence says volumes.
If you'd give me a moment, I would have mentioned it.
No. I wasn't going to give you a moment. I wanted to surprise you.
Oh, you wanted to surprise me. Huh?
There you go.
I like the glasses. Actually.
You like the glasses?
Yeah. It's actually very stylish.
Oh, really?
Yeah. They're kind of the style that a villain would wear.
Yeah.
Like, so if I was going to write a good villain, he'd be wearing those glasses.
Well, you know what? I am not a villain.
You're the hero of the story.
No. I do kind of like them. They're actually pretty cool. Well, since you've segued into it, let's talk about villains. Villains in movies, TV shows, and why do we love them so?
Well, you got to have a good villain to have a good movie, right?
So they say. But it does seem like more people like the villains much more than the heroes. Why? Let's break that down.
Well, I think the villains can operate without any rules. You know, it gives a freedom to the character that a lot of people wish that they may have.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he can say the things that they wish they could say,
Mm-hmm.
you know, or do the things they wish they could do.
Mm-hmm.
The problem with the hero is, you know, he's got to have a moral compass, right?
Right.
So it's not nearly as fun because he's got to be kind of like the righteous, you know, do-gooder. Unless you're Clint Eastwood in a spaghetti western, and then it's sort of like the line is blurred.
Well, that's anti-hero.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
that's on another show.
Yeah, but I mean, it kind of follows in that
Right.
that whole thing, and I think that's why maybe those movies became so popular that people were so used to seeing your John Wayne type characters that were so like morally high and such a do-gooder that when you had somebody that was just, you know, you weren't really exactly sure which side he was on, it
Right.
made it more interesting, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems to me that in the culture that we're living in, villains are more and more celebrated. You know, I do think that it is because they play by their own rules. They do seem to get away with murder sometimes, even when they
That's
commit
the whole
murder.
point, right?
Yeah.
Well, you look at, you know, your characters like, you know, I mean, the Joker, of course, is probably one of the most famous villains of all time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the comic books and now movies and television. But,
Right.
you know, you got a character that's just batshit crazy, pretty much, you know.
Everybody loves the Joker.
Everybody loves the Joker,
Right.
you know, and, except for maybe Jared Leto. I don't know.
You know, to be fair,
I do
think-
like Jared Leto's Joker, actually.
I think Jared Leto is sitting a little pretty right now after Joker 2. I think he's like, you know what?
Not so bad now. How do you like me now?
I'm not so bad. Not so bad. I was the butt of the joke, but not anymore. Yeah, no, it is interesting that from literature all the way to you know, from movies and TV shows, the villains are always the more colorful characters. They're always the more interesting characters, and I think there is a structure. You know, to make good characters, we kind of live through the characters, and a villain does offer an opportunity for normal people, regular people, law-abiding citizens to do.
Wasn't there a movie called Law Abiding Citizen, by the way?
There was
Yeah.
Jamie Foxx, Gerard Butler.
Oh, that's right. That wasn't very good, though. I wasn't a big fan of that.
And he was a villain. He was a villain in that movie.
Jamie Foxx?
No, Gerard Butler.
Gerard Butler. Did he
Yeah.
turn good, though?
No,
No?
neither did the movie.
Ah, okay.
I didn't even have that on the list.
Yeah.
The fact that they should be lucky we've even talked about
it.
that. Yeah. So, but no, it is kind of sexy that a character can say, do, and act any way it wants, and pretty much at times get away with it. And that is something that I think people are very attracted to.
Well, I mean, what is some? I mean, let's just start off with some of your favorite bad guys and why.
Okay. I do have a list. It's like a top 20 and of bad guys and a kind of
Top 20 of bad guys.
yeah, in films.
It's a lot of bad guys.
It's a lot of bad guys, and I have a top 10 in TV bad guys.
Oh, wow.
So it's but before I get there, I do want to ask this one question to you.
What's that?
Well, because since we are going to be talking about villains, and we're going to be talking about some of our favorite character villains, particularly on movies and television. And we're writers, so
Sometimes.
sometimes we are. Sometimes.
That's a tall statement.
But what do you think crafts a good villain? How do you write a good villain, first and foremost, before we go into the list? Let's break this down.
Well, actually, it's interesting with bad guys. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's two ways of looking at it, and I think in some respects it has been a mistake recently, for me anyways.
Right.
I think a good bad guy has to have some kind of mystery to him. Mm-hmm. And I think that's why the Heath Ledger Joker was so awesome.
Right.
Because you really didn't have the backstory on that guy.
Yeah.
You really didn't know where he came from.
Mm-hmm.
And then when he would tell you how he got the scars, he would tell you how he got the scars, it was always a different story.
Right.
He had 2 or 3 different stories of how he got those scars through the movie. So you never really knew if he was even telling the truth at any time or if that was all just made up.
Right.
But I do think that there's a mystery to a bad guy that makes it more interesting and more evil, actually. I mean, you look at Michael Myers, the first
Right.
Halloween.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't know really that much about him other than the fact that he killed his sister when he was 6 or 7 years old.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, but you really didn't know what was driving him, why he was doing what he did. I mean, other than the fact that people say it was pure evil,
So the mystery in those 2 cases in particular helps in some ways for the audience to kind of interpret what might be their drive.
I think so.
You can kind of fill in the blanks a little bit.
Yeah.
Because I will say, like on the Michael Myers end of it, there was something nice about the fact that it was never explained.
Yeah.
And I think bad writing, particularly when you're doing villains, is you're giving us way too much.
Well, there was that whole part where the sequels finally try to reveal that Jamie Lee Curtis was his sister, and and all of this stuff, and it was like, for the love of God, can't we just have a bad guy going around, doing bad things? Why do we have to have everything connected?
There was, when do you think that started? Because it did seem like in the early days there was a villain, and there was a hero, and there was a villain. Mm-hmm. Now it seems to be that the villain somehow has to connect to the hero.
I think it's more of a recent thing because I think, and I'm not saying it's a bad thing or not. I mean, even Hannibal Lecter. You look at Hannibal Lecter in the first Silence of the Lambs.
Right.
You knew he was a psychiatrist and everything, but that's kind of just what he did. Mm-hmm. The only other thing you really knew about him was what he did to his victims.
Yeah, he ate them.
He ate them, exactly. Right. But you never had a soliloquy where he told he was mistreated when he was a kid, and because his mom and daddy beat him, that's why he became a cannibal or anything like that.
But I also think the reason why that character worked so well, in particular, is he's also based from the novel, and I do think that villains in books are a lot more complex. Because
do you think that I never read the book, but do you think that they went into his backstory in that one?
They might have. Yeah. They might have. Well, it depends on what books, because I know the first one that introduced the character was Red Dragon. Mm-hmm. So they might not have gotten. They might have. But he wasn't the central character of that story. So it might have been very similar to what we saw in Manhunter, so to
Right.
speak. But as his popularity grown, because the character went from there to Silence of the Lamb, then you start to get to know more and more about who this character is, and then from that to Hannibal, you really got to know more about the character. Maybe that's just a case of when when a character is written so well that the popularity people are more interested in, then you could dive deeper into that character.
What is your favorite Hannibal? Brian Cox, Anthony Hopkins,
Which
or
is
the TV show? Who was the character that played that?
Mads Mikkelsen.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which was awesome. He was pretty good.
No, let me tell you. I'm going to tell you. I think all three of them. I think all three of them are great. All three of them, in their own rights, they bring something to Hannibal. All three of them. I think Brian Cox brings a certain realism, so real that he's so unassuming the moment you meet him, and yet the precautions that are surrounding this guy, that oh, this is a fucking serial killer. He seems more likely to be a real serial killer.
Hello, Will.
Yeah.
I always
Yeah.
love how he's just so lackadaisical about when Will comes,
Oh, yeah.
when Will Graham comes into the room. Hi, Will.
Well, but see again, good writing, because in the introduction, when Will Graham comes to see him in Manhunter, you don't even see his face. He's lying on the cot.
Yeah.
His arm is covering his face. Nothing dramatic, but it was almost. And he says, "Hello, Will," and then he gets up, and there he is. There's this middle-aged white guy that seems normal at first, but then when he makes a comment about the officer, he was the first to see his basement, then you're just going, oh,
Does he still have the nightmares?
yeah, that's where you go, oh, this guy's pure evil. Compare that to Anthony Hopkins' intro, because now it's Silence of the Lamb. Hannibal is much more a part of the story, where Jodie Foster's character, Clarice, walks in that hallway, that creepy hallway,
Down that maze,
dungeon,
Yeah.
and then behind the glass, you got Hannibal just standing still. And it's like, good evening,
I mean, just a production design alone
It
makes him.
was a creepy out,
yeah.
but it was just literally his stillness of him just standing there waiting for her, and and just good evening, very gentlemanly, very polite. That also was creepy, but that performance was much more of a showy performance. That's an Academy Award performance, which he got. But that's also, again, the structure of that character, the way they introduced that character. Now, the Mads Mikkelsen's character was much more of a younger Hannibal, but he's also a bigger guy and much more terrifying.
Right.
Because of somebody of his size and just the way that he would talk to you in the sequence I felt Hannibal, the TV show, was far more terrifying than both of the films.
Really?
Oh yeah, they're pretty disturbing.
Yeah.
Because they could go even deeper into the disturbing things that Hannibal does. But those are kind of like examples of a very well written character. I also think what makes a good villain too is if he's complex.
Right.
They say most good villains are the villains don't see themselves as the villains; they're the hero of their own story.
Oh yeah.
And that's great, because if you can root for a villain, then all of a sudden you're complicit in that. So you don't stand and judge him. You're just kind of going like, they put you in his shoes, and you're kind of just like, okay, Tony Montana is a perfect example.
Say hello to the bad guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. What I loved about that is that all the heinous things you're rooting from the whole film, But now, in the context of Scarface, any other film, he would be the bad guy, but here he's the hero. So would you say he's more of an anti-hero in that, or would you still say he's still a villain?
That's an excellent question. I say he's both.
Yeah.
Because I think you will, and when we do our list, and when I say we, me, because did you do your list or your top villain list?
I don't do lists.
Oh, the jock of podcasting right here. Look at you. You don't do lists.
I don't do lists.
So I'm the bookworm. I'm the guy that studies. I'm the guy. You knew the assignment.
Hey, I knew the assignment, but I'll figure it out as I go.
Okay.
I don't want to be too rehearsed.
No, there's nothing rehearsed about it. It's just that, my age, I tend to forget.
Okay.
It's nothing about rehearsal. I make the list so I don't forget.
It's a mandatory thing.
Exactly.
Okay.
But I forgot what we were talking about. Where were we?
You're talking about Tony Montana.
Oh yeah. Okay. So we were talking about when does a villain become an anti-hero? I do think a villain becomes an anti-hero usually when he has a code. If he has a specific code that he goes by, and if that code really doesn't really afflict on the casualties, the civilians and stuff like that, if it's usually perpetrated on other bad guys,
right,
then you fall into that anti.
Because he was killing other drug dealers, so it made it okay.
Yeah, exactly. You're killing other mobsters and stuff like that.
Kind of like a Godfather kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah. Or kind of like, for example, Dexter, he was a serial killer, but he killed serial killers.
Yeah, or bad people.
Yeah, so they were always bad people. Yeah. So I think that's where you become a anti-hero as well, but you're still a villain. And so I think we'll run into a couple of those moments where you're going, okay, if we do a list and you're a villain, we may do probably our next podcast will be about anti-heroes, and then that villain will then also be an anti-hero.
Right.
Now, do you think that villains can? Well, I'm curious. Do you also feel like anti-heroes and villains are one of the same, or do you think if you're a villain, you're strictly a villain?
No, not necessarily. I mean, I think it depends on the type of film you're making.
Right.
And I think it depends on the structure of that film and who your real hero is. Now, if you're doing, we mentioned the spaghetti westerns a little bit earlier with Clint Eastwood.
Right.
You see that he's maybe not, morally, clean person throughout the whole thing, but you kind of always have the sense that even though he's done some really shitty things, or you can't totally trust him all the time, you kind of still feel like he still has some sort of moral compass. He sort of still wants to do the right thing, and to some extent, right? And I think that's where the anti-hero comes in. It's almost like they fight the villain on their own terms.
Right. That's interesting.
They can just be just as nasty as the villain can be.
Right.
At times, right?
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah. But if you're looking at a movie, say like a Die Hard, then your Gruber, your Hans Gruber is like the king of all bad guys, if you ask me. One of them, anyways, is that they're so opposites. Your Gruber is elegant. He's very sophisticated,
right,
and cultured,
right,
and he wears a beautiful suit.
Intelligent.
And he's intelligent. Whereas then you got on the opposite flip side of that,
John McClane.
John McClane is,
New York cop,
union, blue collar dude,
right,
wisecracking, streetwise kind of a guy, and they clash. But I think that's when it becomes fun too. Is that the hero and the villain can be so totally opposite in many ways.
But see, again, that's going back to creating I think the way you create a really interesting villain is how he attacks his hero. It has to be in relationship to the hero. And you just mentioned the Han, Gruber, John McClane. That's perfect because Gruber is so organized that he puts McClane at a disadvantage, not only outside of numbers, but just out of just the way he plans everything.
Oh yeah,
he's
playing like 3 steps. He's an ultimate chess player. He's like 3 steps ahead of everybody, even the FBI.
Exactly, and McClane is a checkers guy. He probably doesn't even play checkers. He definitely doesn't play chess.
Yeah,
but at the same time, McClane is the fly in the ointment. He's the guy that gets in the way.
Yeah,
because his pure tenacity that Hans Gruber couldn't calculate.
Right.
And that's why they're a yin to the yang.
Mm-hmm.
It's like Batman and the Joker. Batman represents order.
Right.
Joker, chaos.
Mm-hmm.
Joker is a great villain for Batman. Sherlock Holmes, Moriarty.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's this. You need that total opposite to really challenge your hero, and a lot of times make your hero even a more interesting hero. Because if it's written well, your villain should expose weakness in your hero,
Right.
to make him change in order to rise up to combat the villain. So
Right. Right. So now, would you? I mean, interesting, because when you say villains, and the first thing that comes to my mind when you mention villain,
Yeah.
I say villain in a movie.
right,
I gotta say, the first thing that comes to my mind is
Kirk Douglas.
Huh?
He played the villain. It's called The Villain, right? That's what you were going to say, right?
No, Greg.
Okay, go ahead.
The most obscure Kirk Douglas and what Arnold Schwarzenegger and Margaret. Movie. See, you didn't think I knew that film,
No,
right?
I know. No, Tony, I knew you knew that film.
But the most obscure thing in the world. Okay, anyways, no.
Right.
But when I hear the villain, when I hear a villain, I'm always thinking, first thing that comes to my mind is a Bond villain.
Ah, okay.
Because the James Bond villains, I think, are so iconic.
That's a good point.
And they're always so bad, right? I mean, and I even as a kid, I always wondered this. I said, this guy obviously is a multimillionaire or even a billionaire.
Right.
Why does he need the world too?
Yeah.
I'm like, it's like, at what point is enough? Because it must have cost $1 billion to build that lair that you live in.
Oh, yeah.
That you operate out of, right?
He has, 1,000 men?
Yeah.
That's operating his hidden lair.
I'm sure they're union.
Yeah,
So,
obviously.
yeah.
They're on islands.
Yeah.
Or they're underwater.
Underwater.
Or they're out in space. Yeah, it does. Maybe that's the reason they titled that one Bond film, The World Is Not Enough.
The world is not enough, yeah.
Because
yeah.
it makes sense. Yeah, it is. And also, if the idea of a billionaire wanting to rule the world, he doesn't actually have to rule. He's already ruling the world.
Yeah, aren't you doing pretty damn good?
We got billionaires right now that's pretty much running everything.
Still not enough.
It's still not enough.
Yeah.
You gotta pronounce it.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, then that's really good. That's a good point. So, out of all the Bond films, do you have a favorite Bond villain?
I'd have to go, they're all fun in their own way.
Yeah.
But I would have to go to Goldfinger. Goldfinger is still the, he's the gold.
Yeah, gold
Goldfinger
standard. He's the gold standard.
He's the gold standard.
Oh,
right?
I like that. That's so funny.
Because, it always goes back to that character, I think, as far as, interesting bad guys.
Villains also have the best lines.
Yeah.
It's like, you don't expect me to talk, Goldfinger. No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die.
Yeah.
I mean, a beam is literally about to come right through his manhood there.
Yeah.
And that's the first time in that movie I've seen James Bond sweat.
Well, yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah. I think that's a really good point. It's if you create great dialogue, villains always seems to have the best dialogue and stuff like that. So, but the Bond films are really, really good. All right, so we're talking about villains and we're talking about crafting good villains and stuff. What would be considered a bad villain to like? What are the no-nos of
a bad villain? I
know,
love it.
Which is funny.
It's so redundant.
It is a bad villain.
What makes a bad villain?
But what actually, like one that's just like by the book, like almost like, really, this is?
Well, I think, unfortunately now we've seen so many bad guys throughout the years. Now it becomes cliche.
Right.
And I think the cliche villain, the twirl the mustache, if they had a mustache, they'd be
the monologuing.
Right. Of course, at the very end, which I guess, did James Bond come up with the monologuing bad guy?
No, Batman villains came out with monologuing. But yeah, you're right. But I do think James Bond villains really love to talk about their achievement.
Well, yeah, because they would always have that scene, right, where they'd have to show Bond everything that they're doing and
before they kill him.
explain everything in detail. Because they kind of wanted to show off to him before they killed him.
Or they have some analogy. I always go back to the Javier Bardem in Skyfall, where you have that one shot where Bond is tied and you see the elevator and he comes down the elevator in one take. He comes in and he has this whole monologue about putting rats in barrels, that change their nature. And I mean, to be fair, it was quite impressive because he did it all in one take.
Right.
By the time you got there, you got to the point of what he was actually talking about. I was like, God damn it. They did it so well. But you're right. But I do think, though, at the same time, we've seen so many of these action films where the bad guy is literally just won't shut the fuck up. And just it falls into cliches. Mm-hmm. He's telling you stuff you already know. It's not interesting at all. And usually it's poorly written. And you're just kind of like, get on with it. What are we doing? So there is a craft to that. I'm going to let you go first. I'm going to, do you have some villains that how do you want to do it? Do you have a top 10 in TV, or you can mix it up, or, do you have your top 20? What?
Well, I mean, a very interesting villain, if you want to call him a villain, I guess he would be a villain. If you look at the movie Falling Down.
Yes.
Michael Douglas. That character is so interesting because I love the scene at the very end when he's looking at Robert Duvall, who's the cop, and he looks at Robert Duvall and he goes, I'm the bad guy. and I thought that really summed that movie up beautifully. Is all through the film, he thought he was all in the right, just trying to get home, and he's fighting against all of these like obstacles and all of this frustration and people just won't leave him alone. And at the end, he just realizes that, how did I become the villain?
That's a case of having one bad day.
Yeah.
That started at McDonald's.
Exactly.
It was, he just wanted the breakfast, and the breakfast ended at 11:30, and it was like 11:31.
Yeah.
And right from that point on, it just got terribly, terribly worse.
And as a viewer watching that movie, though, you kind of get you say, you understand his point of view.
Well, because I think the way that the movie does it is that they don't frame him as the villain.
No.
They almost frame him as the victim.
Yes.
Because of all these things that is happening to him. And we can all relate because we've all had bad days, and it seems like...
And we've all been in those situations where, we're being picked on, or we're being like in a situation where, somebody could maybe harm us or something like that.
Right.
Or maybe you're in a situation where somebody's just being a fucking dick,
Oh, no,
that
absolutely.
Kind of thing,
But then another villain that Michael Douglas also plays is Gordon Gekko. Mm-hmm. Greed is good.
Yeah.
Just that line. And that movie came out on Wall Street in the 80s. Yeah. Greed is good. Mm-hmm. He makes being a villain attractive.
Right.
Because a lot of what he says is true. That speech he makes. And it still is. Yeah. Greed is good. And, but I love the line, like, how much is enough is enough? How many boats can you sell?
It's the Bond villain, right?
Yeah,
it's like, how much is enough?
Yes, exactly. So, I mean, okay, so those are some good ones. Any other?
Well, I mean, what's some of your favorite?
All right. Well, first of all,
you got the list.
I got the list. Okay.
Now, I'm curious, was Falling Down on that list?
No.
Okay.
So I'm gonna hit my list.
Okay.
And then if there's a few that you want to inject, feel free, and we'll discuss it.
Okay, let's hear your list.
Okay. First and foremost, I'm taking these goddamn glasses off.
Well, you can't see the list with your glasses on?
Well, kind of. I can see them better. So I'm going to kind of do television first.
Okay.
Because it's probably a little bit easier.
TV.
And
I don't really watch a lot of TV anymore. Now, is this television or streaming?
Both.
Both, okay.
Yeah, it's amazing we lived long enough to see TV switch over to streaming.
And I am so happy about that.
Why?
Well, remember we were talking earlier about, perfect example, $6 Million Man. Mm-hmm. Love that show.
Oh, yeah.
Love the show.
Yeah.
We used to watch the $6 Million Man all the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when you watch those old episodes, right, you could tell they were on a budget, man. You could tell that they were just shooting. It's like we got to get this shot done. Let's go out in the hallway and do it.
Oh yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it's kind of like, you know, fuck the lighting.
Yeah.
You know, if
We got
exposure.
We got 20 minutes.
We got exposure. We're going to get a master shot. We go, we hit, we go on, right?
Yeah.
There was not a lot of artfulness in television, you know. Even when it was well written, it was still, it always kind of looked very, you know, bland and kind of like everything was shot in a laundromat, right?
But when you're a kid, did you really care?
Sometimes, but no, I mean, yeah, I mean, especially if you were like, you know, some of your detective shows that I used to watch all the time when I was a kid. But honestly, and we're kind of getting off the track.
Well, no,
here,
actually not really, because you brought it up, the $6 Million Man.
Yeah.
Look how many villains he had. He had the $7 Million Man. He fought
which is proof that money is not always better.
Yes.
Exactly. Because it's more expensive doesn't make it better.
That's true.
Because the $7 Million Man got his ass kicked by Steve.
Yes. He had 2 bionic arms. Steve only had 1. Steve also fought the Thembots. You got to love it if the face falls out and they're robots and stuff.
And who was the main one?
No, it was John Saxon.
John
Saxon.
Yeah.
Mr. Freddy Krueger, Enter the Dragon, John Saxon.
Yeah.
Then there was my favorite. There's 2 of my favorite villains, which were.
By the way, that fight between him and John Saxon went on for how many minutes?
Oh, that went on for a long time.
That's got to be like one of the longest fights in TV history.
Not to mention the fact they were moving slow, 3 times
Slow
slower.
motion too.
Always, you gotta look. But then there was this giant indestructible tank truck car that he was fighting. It was just this weird. It's kind of shaped like a tank, but it wasn't a tank. But it was just this weirdness. But my favorite, let's be honest, when the $6 Million went up against Bigfoot, they had Bigfoot as one of his biggest villains.
Bigfoot was classic.
That was very classic.
Yeah.
So now leading into that, which is funny, but one of my favorite villains, this is more or less 10 on my list, is the Riddler from the 1966 Batman show.
Love the Riddler.
Frank Gorshin, the way he portrayed the Riddler was incredible because he was so psychotic.
Yeah.
And yes, there was the Joker, there was the Penguin, but the Riddler
Did he have a more maniacal laugh than the Joker did?
He did. It was much more sadistic.
Yeah.
It was just he would take glee in inflicting pain on Batman and Robin. It was just like in his riddles.
Well, the energy level, right? Is the energy level he had.
Oh,
because he was like he's on cocaine now.
Oh, he was on something. He just loved the riddles and he loved the torment, but he really just loved I remember there was an episode where Batman and Robin were hanging. It was the wax episode from this big pot of wax, liquid wax, and he's just taking delight in seeing them slowly going down the pot of fatted wax. It was just like this. I said, wow, this guy is really psychotic.
Yeah.
But he just played it so and you're right, the laughter, his little Riddler laugh and dance and stuff.
And he always kind of smacky.
Oh yeah. It was just, so he was my favorite. Speaking of robot types of vehicles or whatever, my number 9 is, I got to say, it's a kind of a tie between the Dalek or the Master and any Doctor Who.
Doctor Who. Yeah.
Doctor Who, 60 years. And this is when you know a villain works, when you get a tin can, you stick a plunger right on its head.
I mean, when I was a kid, I said, "That's a plunger.
That's a plunger.
That's a plunger, man."
Exactly.
Yeah. You know what made that character though? What made that character
work? Yeah.
Yeah. For me, anyways. Mm-hmm. The thing that made that character so scary, despite of the silliness of how it maybe looked physically,
right?
The voice.
Exterminate!
That voice. It's so like just like nails on a blackboard kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And I remember when I was a kid, I just found that so unsettling.
Oh yeah.
You know.
Yeah. It's the reason I keep coming back.
Yeah.
Because again, it's the perfect foil for the Doctor.
Uh-huh.
And then you got the Master. Any kind of Master. I mean, you remember when they did the TV movie and Eric Roberts was the Master?
He's actually a pretty good Master.
For that TV movie. I always liked the one John Sims played the Master with the David Tennant.
Right.
He was like, I thought he was a perfect fit for Tennant.
Now, would you say the Angels in Blink?
Oh, and then, yes. Well, you're right. Thank you. The Weeping Angel.
Yeah.
They are now moved up to the dialects and the master, and then you know, and you got the Cybermen.
Right.
You know, but the nice thing about the Weeping Angel was when that episode came, they were creepy as fucks because
Oh.
the fact that you blink and they move and they change expressions, oh my god,
scared me as an adult.
Yes,
I mean, I'm
yeah.
like going, and that's what cracks me up about Doctor Who.
Mm-hmm.
I guess the British are on a whole different level than us Americans because
Right.
that's supposed to have been a kid's show.
Thank you.
And I'm like going, dude,
Mm-hmm.
I'm finding that pretty creepy. If I'd have seen that as a 5 or 6 year old, I'd have been like,
Oh yeah.
I'd have needed some like therapy after that.
Oh, you're screwed. You're screwed. You're totally screwed. And then speak of Hannibal, the TV show Hannibal.
Hannibal,
It's
yeah.
kind of like on my 8th list. Matt, we talked about him. Matt Mickelson did an incredible job. And again, but that's a great character.
Right.
So whoever plays Hannibal, it's kind of like Hamlet.
Right.
You bring your own interpretation with you, and that was a very disturbing show. That was a very disturbing show. Number 7, Dexter Morgan. You know, Michael C. Hall as Dexter. I love that show until the end. They didn't stick. We talked about that. They didn't stick the landing, but I always loved that opening with the eggs and the blood and
ham or whatever.
Yeah.
You slice them.
and the narration. That was also what's great was what's going in Dexter's head, you know, and
I hear the reboot or
They are.
the extension of after that final episode. I hear the new ones are actually pretty good.
well, they got I haven't seen the new Dexter reboot,
Right.
but they're also doing a prequel, Dexter Origin, and this is when Dexter is younger, but Harry is alive.
Well, you know, it's another show, but
Well, tell me how you really feel right
you know,
now.
I just really hate having to constantly go back and tell the origin of characters that you love.
Yeah,
It's kind of like Han Solo.
yeah.
It's like we didn't need it. We
You
didn't
didn't
want it.
you didn't want to know how Han got his name?
No.
It's Han Solo.
How he got his gun? Could care less.
yeah.
Figured he got it somewhere.
And you didn't care that he shot first at the end of Solo. See, I thought he shot first at the end of Star Wars. But
Well,
I
that's the
heard-
way he did until we revised history.
Yeah.
We're always doing this revisionist history thing nowadays, right?
The Kessel Run was so much more fun in my imagination.
Oh, yeah.
Than what they showed in that movie.
Everything they showed me in Han Solo was derivative and just unnecessary. So, yeah, I'm not excited about this prequel idea.
No.
it does not get me.
I hear you. But at the same time, Harry trained, because that was the nice thing about the show Dexter, is that he would imagine his father and the idea that his father knew he was a serial killer, but he had to hone in his urges, and by honing it in as a cop to target other killers
Exactly.
was very
but don't
genius.
We kind of got that already in the
I know.
show.
Yeah, that's
So
that's
we have
true.
to do more of it.
Yeah, I know. Money. How do we revise an old IP?
IP, right? Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of prequels. And even Hannibal had a prequel in the movies,
Right.
which I didn't watch because I didn't care.
Yeah.
Because I think you hit on a very good point, and I think this is also what makes a great villain, and particularly in the crafting of it, is the less you know about what makes someone tick, I think the creepier and scarier that character is.
Yeah.
Okay, so Dexter was 7. Now, number 6 is a tie.
Oh, here we go.
Okay.
Tie.
Yeah, well, first is I have to mention The Wire.
What number is this?
This is number 6.
Number 6. But why 6 a tie?
Because
Why couldn't it have been 7 or 5 or 4? I like that. It's interesting that number 6 is the tie.
because it's the way that I wrote it.
Okay.
Okay, there's that ends the mystery. It was number 6 because that was the one I was having the hardest time trying to figure out between the two, and I just said, "Fuck it, it's my list." These guys going
All
all
right.
the time. I spent a lot of nights putting this list together. Okay, so number 6. First of all, even though I did watch the first season of The Wire, I was not a Wire watcher, but I did see the first 3 seasons.
Right.
Technically, all you need to see of The Wire is season 1 and season 3. Skip season 2. But the name that kept popping up was Stringer Bell. And every time, even when I wasn't watching it, I kept hearing that name, and then I kept looking at the actor playing him, and Idris Elba. That's how I knew about Idris Elba, was Stringer Bell, a very capable, intelligent, very business-oriented. He wasn't just a hustler, but he was a criminal that really was stunning. I always loved that. And I thought that brother was American. Did not know he was British.
Would you say that outside of Luther, maybe, that's his best role?
Yes.
Yeah.
I said yes, which then goes to the tie, which is Alice Morgan, no relation to Dexter Morgan, which is in Luther.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, Alice.
So your connection here is Idris Elba. That's why.
There you go.
Okay.
That,
now I understand.
oh,
It's all becoming clear. See, you kept me in suspense there, Greg.
oh, there you go. That's how you feel.
Truly
Why
good
is
storytelling right there. You kept it. You kept that in your pocket.
Oh.
You pulled it out right at the right moment.
Let me tell you something. Alice Morgan, played by Ruth Wilson, delivered one of the most bone-chilling, scary villains. Because watching Luther season 1, I thought I knew where that first episode was going to go.
Right.
Where this is Luther's Joker, and he's going to take her down. And midway, they pull a switch that I just go, what the fuck? And by the time I got to the end, it was just like I went from this woman is fucking creepy to rooting for this chick. She's great. And then back in season 3, she's just as great in season 3. That show really worked because she was the perfect villain, Alice, for Luther.
I love Luther, and she was a big part of that.
No, she was great. And again, and really, can't you say though, Luther was the realistic Batman? Because that's really what he was.
Yeah,
I mean, he wore the coat. That was his cape. That was his coat with the red tie. That was his cape.
Yeah.
And Alice was just his Joker.
Yeah.
So that's, you're right though. I guess it must have been a subconscious thing. I didn't even realize that Idris Elba made those two number 6. It was a tie.
I get your number 6 tie now.
Okay, so these are my top 5 for television.
Okay.
And if there's any you want to interject before I hit the top 5,
okay.
do it now or forever hold your peace. I'm just kidding. No. Okay, number 5. And this is going to surprise you, but not. The number 5 villain for me is J.R. Ewing from Dallas.
J.R. Ewing was an amazing villain.
Well, he was a son of a bitch.
He was the guy everybody loved to hate.
Who Shot J.R. was one of the highest rated shows.
It was the highest rated show
ever. I think it was only topped by MASH series finale.
Yeah.
But it was literally everybody who shot that son of a bitch.
Unless you were around during that time, you have no idea.
Yes.
The impact that show had.
And
even if you didn't see this, even if you were not an avid watcher or avid fan,
Yeah.
and I watched the show. I mean, I was not like glued to that show every week. I knew who JR was, and I watched it here and there. But I totally knew that last episode was like, oh wow, that was the thing that everybody talked about all summer long about, who's going to be the one that you discover shot him, right?
And which is funny too, because I watched it because of Larry Hagman, because I grew up on I Dream of Jeannie.
Well, it's a very different character than I Dream of Jeannie.
Exactly. He was the good guy that we just kept saying, why are you not banging Gina? What's going on? How many wishes?
Even when I was a kid, I kept on going, dude,
I know.
Are you kidding me?
I know.
It's freaking Barbara Eden.
Yes. Yes. So and most, which I find interesting, is it does seem like television stars usually, if you're really good, will have like 2 lives. Like if you have a hit show, 9 out of 10, if it's a really good hit show, you might do other things, but you may then turn around and in your later part of your career have another hit show.
Right.
And his was interesting because him playing kind of the lovable astronaut kind of in a silly, goofy show, then all of a sudden turns into a bastard, and perfectly, that almost makes you forget that he did that. So
like a Don Johnson, Miami Vice, and then Nash Bridges.
Yeah, no. Not exactly. So J.R. Ewing, Who Shot J.R., number 5. Yeah. Now, number 4, this has to be in the top 4 because you got, and this is also a tie. Mm-hmm. But it's a tie because you got a pair of villains and they're all Game of Thrones related. You got Cersei Lannister.
Uh-huh.
And then you got her freaking bastard son, Joffrey. And that son of a bitch. Never have I ever wanted to hurt a little kid as much as I wanted to kill that kid. Him and Cersei.
Yeah, when he got poisoned, everybody was like clapping, right?
It wasn't enough. It wasn't enough. Yeah.
He got all too easy.
Well, because of the end of the season 1, you just realize how ruthless Joffrey was, and you just was like, which is ironic because I saw a video. It's funny you mentioned the poison because I saw the video of the actor that played him. I think his name is Jack Gleason, but he turned out to be the kid that was in Batman Begins.
Oh, interesting. I never knew that.
Yeah, he was on the fire escape when Batman was climbing into the abandoned building. But he gives a speech, and seriously, the nicest guy, like really super nice, and that really messed me up because when he actually died, I was like, yeah, but that. I don't know. I hate that. I like to hate my villains. So, wait till you die before I realize the actor is actually pretty good. And Cersei, come on. Cersei is freaking, she was such a great villain. I hated the way she died. I think a
lot of people died in a lame way in that last episode.
But wasn't it her final season that was it how long did Game of Thrones go? Like 8 seasons?
8 seasons, yeah.
But when the last season, her just standing on the balcony drinking wine, almost every shot was her drinking wine. I did like the one where she had the Godfather. She killed all her enemy in that explosion at the end of season 7. So she was great. Now, number 3, and these pretty much stayed the same. Tony Soprano.
Okay.
So you got it.
Would you say he's a villain?
Yes.
Okay.
Because the show really does do a job to, one, you sympathize with him, which is why it's a great show.
Right.
So
you wouldn't call him an anti-hero?
I could. No, it's funny. It's funny you say that. I would consider Tony Montana more of an anti-hero than I would Tony Soprano, because I think Tony Soprano he's organized crime.
Right.
So his code is making money.
Right.
He's not really there to inflict on other people. He's making money. It's just that he's he's more of a normal human being.
Right.
And Gandolfini just played him perfectly.
Yeah.
Because remember, he was a character actor that we grew up watching in all those movies.
Well, he has that awesome
Tarantino
scene
films.
in True
Romance.
Yeah, True Romance.
A great villain scene too.
Yeah.
He was one of those guys you really just wanted to kill. So the fact that and I was so happy that he got the opportunity to lead his own show. But yeah, no, he's a villain. He's a villain, but he was a complex villain, and he was a villain that you sympathized and kind of rooted for because again they would put him up against other villains on that show, other gangsters, and also he loved his family. So whenever you have a villain that's relatable, it's a lot easier for us to get on board with.
Right.
So he's number 3. Now, number 2.
I mean, you rooted for him as if he was the hero of that show, though.
Yeah. Well, what they end up doing a lot of times is that because he is the lead, he's kind of the hero of his story. But even if you're the hero of your story and your story is about crime and you're kind of more or less the kingpin of that, then yeah, you're still the villain. You're still killing people. Right. And let's be honest, Sopranos is only, for me, really the most interesting is when they're whacking people.
Well, okay, yeah, but so now there's a flip side to that coin.
Go for it.
Robert De Niro in Heat. Is he the villain?
There you go. Okay, yes, he is the villain.
Yeah.
But he's so fucking cool.
Yeah.
And
you're rooting for him. You really don't want Pacino to catch him.
Yeah, but you could also say he's also an anti-hero.
Yeah.
And the reason I say anti-hero is, yes, he's ripping off people, but he's really ripping off the banks.
Right.
And
he's not ripping off people individually.
Well, because there's the line he says when he robs the bank, he says, we're not here for your money. We're here for the bank's money. Your money is insured.
Yeah.
Right off the bat, he's looking out for the people.
Yeah.
In the very beginning, he doesn't want to kill somebody,
right?
But because he's got Wayne Grove on there,
Grove, yeah.
You got that wild card in your crew. once he shot somebody, he had to do his job.
Right.
That makes him a villain, but it also kind of makes him the anti-hero that we're rooting for because he goes against the establishment.
Right.
And I think which is also funny because that's what villains do anyway. And I think maybe that's also the reason why we root for them, because we know what the establishment does. We know how they come down on the working class.
Right.
So whenever you get, it's like a Robin Hood. You go in there, these guys rob, they steal from the rich and they keep to themselves. I respect that. So yes, I would say that, good pull. I'm glad you brought up Heat.
Yeah.
I would say that he is a villain, but he's also an anti-hero.
Right.
Okay. So number 2, going back to TV, this is a tie.
Okay.
Walter White, Breaking Bad, but you got to have Gus Fring, because Walter and Gus are they're flip side of the same coin.
Right.
Because you don't really get Heisenberg unless you have a Gus Fring.
Right.
Because Gus, he just did it so perfectly. He hid in plain sight, and Carlos Esposito just killed it. And you got why can't I think of who plays Walter White?
You talking about Bryan Cranston?
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. This is why I write the list. This is why I have the list, because I wrote the characters there. I did actually, because I thought I would remember the actor.
People.
I thought I was going to remember the actor's name, but I wrote all the characters. It's the actor's names I'm forgetting. But yeah, Bryan Cranston. What's so brilliant about Breaking Bad and what Vince Gilligan did is he never told you that this was a story about the origin of a villain.
Right.
You did not know that, I think, until the 3rd season. I think all this time it was about a guy that was going to die of cancer. He had to find a quick
you're
way.
feeling so bad for
Absolutely.
the guy, right? You're like, and you feel his pain of trying to make sure that and the way they set that character up is that, it's sort of like life passed him by.
Oh yes, perfect. Yes,
and but there was a moment when he was at the top of his game. He was the guy that everybody thought was going to be uber successful, and
he wasn't.
And he wasn't.
And he wasn't. And the people that he was going to be successful was success. He was the one that got out and took the money, and they became super successful. Life has passed him by. And society has beat him down. He was a chemistry teacher. They got no respect in class. Had to work 2 jobs.
And now he's in a situation where he really is going to, not only does he live a life of a loser, but he's going to die a loser.
Yeah.
And now his family's going to lose because they're not going to be left with anything
Yeah, no, he would leave them in debt.
Yeah.
And that's why that was a great pilot.
Yeah.
Because that was all in the pilot. It was
you
all
understood that desperation, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what was great also in the pilot, and this is something, I've always been a big Jekyll and Hyde fan, from all the way back to all the movies, and you got the book.
Which is your favorite Jekyll and Hyde?
I think I'm a big Spencer Tracy fan.
That's a good one, right?
And that one really, really, because I grew up watching Spencer Tracy.
Yeah.
I never knew he had it in him.
Yeah.
And that when Mr. Hyde, he's like really, really creepy. But probably the most creepiest Mr. Hyde was John Barrymore.
Yeah.
The silent Mr. Hyde, because that guy.
And that makeup effect.
Remember
the makeup
yeah.
effect? I guess they shot that with some special makeup under infrared light.
Mm-hmm. Oh, you're talking about I think you're talking about Frederick. You're talking about Frederick Mark.
Is that Frederick Mark?
Yeah, he also did. He was Mr. Hyde as well.
Yeah.
But you're right. That's the one you're talking about.
That's what I'm thinking about. Yeah. Okay. That's the one I'm thinking about. But I always was just amazed at that makeup effect. Mm-hmm. Because he does it all in camera.
Yes.
In one
that was
shot.
great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. When Frederick Mark changed to Mr. Hyde, I thought that was great.
Yeah.
But for me, the reason the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde was fascinating, because as a kid, I didn't understand. I thought there were 2 people.
Yeah.
I didn't understand it was.
Well, they look so much different, right?
Well, they were different.
Yeah.
There were different personalities.
Yeah.
So it was the first time as a kid I realized it was the same person. And when I realized that, I was always fascinated with how does a person let out their darker self. Mm-hmm. And I thought, there was something about that was very interesting.
Now, I got a good question for you with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Is the doctor was handsome, or most of the time he was handsome. But when he became Hyde, he became like this hideous being. But yet he was able to get the chicks.
Yeah, out of fear. The chicks are afraid of him. But what Mr. Hyde did have was he had Jekyll's money.
Yeah.
And at that time, women would go to whoever had money.
Money, right.
And what Jekyll had also was a certain amount of bravado. He had confidence. He had arrogance.
Reminds me of a certain president.
You know. Oh. Well, we are talking about villains. But that's true. But that is interesting because Mr. Hyde, Jekyll was from the upper class. It was very stiff. It was very. He was an aristocrat. Hyde was from the gutter, you know. But Hyde was
especially that Tracy when he became Hyde. He was like this hideous dude.
Yeah, but I also recognize that was the way of by making Jekyll this handsome guy, all of a sudden become hideous, was showing all the ugliness that comes. Evil projects ugliness. It was all over the face and stuff like that. But Vince Gilligan tapped that into the Walter White character, where you see shades of another personality striving to come out of this very boring, bland, middle-aged guy.
Which you figure now see, this is interesting because would you say that which is the real persona?
I think deep down, Walter White and Heisenberg they're both the real persona. I think Walter White has sat on his emotions for so long that he eventually broke bad. Right. Very similar, and it was always in the title. Very similar to Falling Down.
Right.
It's like if you don't have a way...
You get pushed far enough.
You get pushed far enough, and you don't stand up for yourself. Because that was another thing. Walter White didn't stand up for himself. Yeah. So he finally created an alter ego that stood up for himself and then started killing people. But again, in order to get that, you got to get a Gus Fring. Right. Because Gus was, even though Walter was intelligent, but he was intelligent in the chemistry of making blue meth. Right. But Gus was intelligent in the organization of how to run an empire. Right. And you saw from that and Better Call Saul how he took out his enemies. Right. And Gus kept the empire much longer than Walter. Walter let his emotion and his ego get in the way. Right. So those two are a tie. Now, you want to know who my number one pick for television? Streaming?
All right.
I once said that if The Sopranos made out with Breaking Bad and they had a child, all right, that child would be the Penguin.
Oh, I've got to have the Penguin in there.
Yes, because I'm not going to. For anybody wants to,
we've already done 3 shows on the Penguin. Greg.
Yeah, so this is going to be as brief as you get. But for a show to take a comic book character and one that's silly, like the Penguin, and develop real shades of layers, makes you root for this character all the way until you hate this character, and then you see the way they landed it and realize he was the sick delusional. He was a villain from day one, and he never stopped being the villain.
But he sort of did the same thing to us as a viewer as he did to Victor.
That's right.
We were lulled into rooting for him.
Oh yeah,
and wanting him to succeed, not realizing that he was so psychotic and so over
that he was going to betray our trust.
Yeah,
and that's great writing. Yeah, the 3 people that knew Oz all suffered. His Victor, Sophia, and his mom. Right. All ended up worse off than they were before they ever met this guy. Yeah. And that is why that is number 1. If they keep it to just one season, boom,
perfect.
If they do a season 2 or 3,
DC,
they can change.
Remember this.
Okay, so that's on the television side.
Okay.